Good morning, everybody. It's John Garber from Flying Chimp Media, and I'm joined again today by a really terrific guest with tremendous experience, Mr. David Strauss of the Strauss Law Firm. Good morning, David.
Good morning, Jonathan. Good morning, any viewers we have today.
Yes. You look great for quarantine. Something tells me you've been out fishing a little. I don't know if that's legal, but it looks like you've been out fishing.
Yeah, I guess my tan gave me away.
That gives it away. And I guess my lack of same gave that away.
I have a creative interpretation of the governor's order, the safe at home order, combined with the order he entered the next day saying that his order takes precedence over any local rules, ordinances, or orders that were enacted in response to COVID-19. Like the one where they said the beach is closed.
Can you say if you're going to eat your fish, does that become an essential work? Are you an essential worker for catching fish?
Actually, under the governor's safer at home order, fishing is specifically enumerated as an essential recreational activity.
Well, you're safe. Maybe we should start the hashtag fishing alone.
Yep.
So, David, I asked you on the phone if you would talk to our audience a little bit, if they're renters. Specifically, if they're renters, I know a lot of people who may have been able to pay their rent first couple months of this shutdown, 1 month, now 2 months. Obviously, we see jobless numbers go up. And if they're not in a rent crisis today, they're maybe seeing one right around the corner. And do you have a couple of tips, maybe just 3 top tips that people who are renting need to know specifically for Florida?
Yes, first and foremost, what people need to understand is the governor's order that imposed a moratorium on evictions and foreclosures for 45 days, which expires May 18th. It's not that far away.
No, it's right on the corner.
Does not in any way suspend a tenant's obligation to pay the rent to their landlord. All it means is if they can't, the landlord can't file for eviction until May 18th or later. And that's very serious because what that means is if a tenant doesn't pay and the landlord serves a 3-day notice, a 3-day rent demand, and says, here's what you owe me. If you don't pay it within 3 days, I'm suing you for eviction. Well, guess what? If they don't pay within that 3 days, the landlord can treat the lease as terminated. And the landlord has no obligation to reinstate it. They may have to wait till May 18th to file for eviction, but if they don't want to reinstate that lease, and they are by no means required to, even if the tenant comes up with every penny they owe, the lease has already been terminated, the landlord could say, no, get out. And there are many reasons why a landlord might want to get their tenants out right now. They might want an empty building because it might be easier for them to sell it or flip it. So that's important to understand is the governor's order does not provide relief from the obligation, and you can lose very valuable rights if you don't pay your rent. So the number 2 tip that I think is very important is really the most important is just like with the mortgage issue, communication with the landlord. If you don't communicate with the landlord, they have no reason to make any exception for you. They're going to serve you with that 3-day notice. But if you communicate with them and try to work something out with them, and there's a lot of creative ways that you can work this out. First of all, a lot of tenants don't realize the fact that their landlord may be relying on their rent money to pay the underlying mortgage on the property.
Right.
The landlord might need that money. They got their own bills to pay too. That's not always the case, but it very often may be.
Right.
So one proposal that a tenant could make in that scenario, if they have last month in security already being held by their landlord, maybe the landlord will agree to apply last month in security to 2 of the months that they can't pay right now. To ease this along, the landlord still is getting their money. They can still pay their underlying mortgage or whatever other bills they need to pay that from. Another arrangement they could reach is some form of forbearance, where the landlord, let's say, forgives the rent, not forgives, but forbears the rent obligation for 90 days.
Delays. Forbearance delays.
Or suspends the obligation for 90 days or 60 or whatever the tenant needs. And then maybe the landlord will agree that the arrears can be broken down into 6 equal monthly payments to make it up in addition to the regular monthly rent when it comes due. Not an option for everybody, but maybe an option for some. The point is to get creative Some landlords will have the ability to be more patient than others, certainly. But work with and communicate with your landlord. Don't be in the situation where your lease could have been terminated.
So part of the key to that, I think, is communicate, communicate, communicate. Don't wait for the landlord to come to you. That's not necessarily that they're not financial geniuses necessarily. I mean, you and I know people who are commercial investors. Then a lot of people just live in a multi-tenant building. Guy could live on site. It's not that sophisticated a situation. In most cases, the renter, the landlord, it doesn't really suit them to start evicting people. And then in this climate, try and find new qualified renters. It's not that easy. Their legal process is a costly process for them too. So they may be open to really talking to you if you're open and honest. We're in this together. So landlords
That's
got
a very good point to emphasize, Jonathan, is a lot of people are going to wait until the landlord comes hounding them for the money. And that's a mistake. I think the landlord is going to respond much more positively and be more flexible with a tenant who reaches out before the rent is due to say, oh my God, I'm terribly sorry. I've been furloughed from work or my income's disappeared and I don't know how I'm going to pay the rent. Let's work something out. They're going to find more flexibility if they approach it that way.
Yeah, especially if you've been a steady paying tenant for a period of time. They know your character. Great tip. Is there, you have a third one for us?
Yeah, the third option is for the people who have no options. I just want to give people some understanding of how the process works so that they can sleep at night and know the sheriff's not coming tomorrow or anytime soon.
That's scary.
Yeah, there are going to be people, unfortunately, there are going to be landlords who are not willing to work with their tenants. There are going to be landlords who, for whatever personal reason, want to get the tenant out of possession as soon as they can. And for people in that scenario, first of all, they should rest assured nobody can file for eviction, or they're not going to accept any eviction filings until after May 18th. The other thing they need to know is once eviction proceedings start again, the system is going to be severely backlogged. And it's going to be an eviction crisis. It's going to be hard for the courts to handle it. The judges are required to advance those cases on their calendar, but if there are too many of them, they're not going to be able to. So I expect that we're going to see evictions move very slowly. I think we're going to see judges being more flexible than they typically are, maybe deciding that they're not really supposed to do this, but it has happened before. Judges have the discretion to say, oh, well, the law abhors a forfeiture. The lease is reinstated as long as the tenant pays all the arrears by such and such a date. Not likely, and I don't think supported by law, but it has happened, and judges may do that. Don't bank on that. But the bottom line is it's a process. The landlord files the eviction. You have 5 days to file an answer. Save your money so you can hire an attorney to defend you. You may be able to spend more time in possession than you thought. And a good idea, by the way, also, is as soon as it's possible, try to find someplace else to go before the eviction shows up in the court records. Because if a prospective landlord finds that in the court records, they're going to be much less likely to enter into a lease with a prospective tenant.
Right. And you don't want to go through an eviction. You don't want to challenge a landlord to say, hey, evict me. It's an ugly process. It's a really ugly process. I don't think landlords take pleasure in it. And I know that tenants don't like the BSO showing up and sheriff showing up and throwing their stuff out. It's ugly. And if there are kids involved, you don't want to go down that road.
I'm Jonathan. That's an interesting point you raised about the sheriff. Not only is the court process a process where you have an opportunity to defend yourself, and there are defenses that are available, like impossibility of performance, force majeure. If it's in your lease, you might have a defense based on force majeure. Frustration of purpose. There are different legal doctrines that can be used as defenses. But when everything goes all the way around, if you ultimately lose the case and a writ of possession gets issued, now there's another process. The sheriff's office is going to be severely backed up with evictions. And it might not be within a week or two that an eviction is carried out. It could take months. And the sheriff might not be willing to proceed diligently because they might feel a lot of sympathy for people in that scenario because of this lockdown. So I just want people to rest assured, no one's going to be evicted anytime soon. They're going to have plenty of time to consult an attorney, understand their rights, and defend themselves, and hopefully stay in possession as long as possible.
So the biggest takeaway, if I could sum up your 3 points, is you've got to be proactive. You can't just be a passive passenger on this and see what happens. You've got to get in front and take care of your own needs of keeping a roof over your head. Communication is key. David, I know a lot of attorneys. You and I walk in some similar circles. If someone is struggling with rent, they may not see the possibility of even calling an attorney to review their mortgage. You said maybe there's a force majeure clause. Leases are legal documents. I'm a layperson. Now I'm already underarmed, right? I'm ill-manned on that. How does someone get help from an attorney if they're worried about paying the rent?
Right. Well, that's true. I think a lot of people have that conception that, hey, I can't pay my rent. I can't pay a lawyer either. But I'm very happy to say that I'm giving free consultations right now, and I'm sure plenty of my colleagues are giving free consultations right now. And even ones that are charging a fee for a consult, it's not going to be more than a couple of $100s. So for people who can't pay their rent, but they come up with a couple of $100, or if they're lucky and they can find an attorney like my firm that will give a free consult, that's not something they're going to need to worry about. They're going to be able to talk to somebody.
Okay, good to know. Good to know. And I thank you and your colleagues who are out there offering free consultations for people. I know that you're very high tech. You're able to do web conferences in addition to phone calls with people. People can take a picture of their lease and just email it to you. Business is going, and I know a lot of attorneys, I have many of them as clients. They've shifted to an online format, and they are trying to help as many people as they can. And on behalf of the community, I thank you and your colleagues for doing that. David, we are out of time. I appreciate it very much. This is fantastic information. And if you're watching this outside of Florida, outside of South Florida, know that you have resources in your state as well. And I'm sure if you check the Bar Association where you live, look on social media, you'll find attorneys like David who are willing to certainly have a call with you and explain to you what your options are. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure, Jonathan. Thank you.